Welcome to my channel Limelight Leaks. Please share and subscribe and hit the bell icon for new updates. Cut the neck, and he said that he was very careful that when you cut the neck it's very close to the vocal cords. They told me they're very clear. You may not come out of this alive, and I said, oh well, that's a plus. He didn't break guitars, didn't get addicted to drugs, didn't get caught doing bad things for over 50 years. Paul Rodgers never destroyed a stage, never partied too much, never called himself a legend. But Freddie Mercury once called him the best rock singer in England. He once made entire stadiums go quiet with just one note. He filled in for Freddie and Queen, played music with Jimmy Page, and wrote amazing rock songs with Free Bad Company and The Firm. But when he was most famous, he walked away. While everyone else chased what was popular, he chose to write blues music in a quiet studio. While other singers fell into drugs and drinking, Paul Rodgers stayed strong quietly, but powerfully. Now, after 2 strokes and more than 11 mini-strokes that almost took his voice away, he comes back at 73 with a new album. Not to prove anything, not to hold on to fame, simply because it's what he has always done. Sing like life still has stories left to tell. This isn't a story about a rock star. It's the story of a man who won't give up, and of a voice not loud, but lasting, burning like a coal that won't die season after season. Early life. Paul Bernard Rodgers was born on December 17, 1949 in Middlesbrough, a smoky factory town in the northeast of England where the sound of ship horns and the smell of coal were part of the morning routine. His father worked as a painter in the construction business, while his mother, rarely talked about in the news, was a homemaker who took care of the children and the house. The Rodgers family came from a purely working-class background. No artistic family history, no ties to show business, and certainly not the kind of place where people dreamed of music as a job. Paul was the middle child of 3 brothers. Their small house stood in a simple neighborhood where kids grew up with mud, street football, and evenings spent gathered around an old radio. Rodgers once shared that his first big moment came when he heard the voice of Ray Charles coming from that radio in the living room. It wasn't the beat, but the deep soulfulness in the way Ray held each note that stopped the 10-year-old boy in his tracks. From that moment, Paul began secretly listening to soul and blues records every night, learning to copy the singing style of Otis Redding, Sam Cooke, and Muddy Waters. Though no one in his family did the arts, his parents never stopped him. In fact, they quietly helped his passion by letting him practice in the backyard shed. At age 14, Paul started his first school band with a few friends called the Roadrunners. He played bass and sang lead vocals. They performed at school parties and small local bars, earning only pocket change but filled with energy. While his classmates looked toward factory work or technical college, Paul quietly but firmly began thinking about a serious path in music. After finishing high school, he left his hometown and moved to London. A bold move for a young man with no money, no connections, just a voice and a fuzzy belief that if he didn't do it now, he never would. It was in London, among countless struggling bands and hundreds of noisy bars, that Paul Rodgers met the first people who would go on to form the band Free. But before the stage lights ever came on, he carried with him a rare foundation, a childhood not tragic, but simple enough to build toughness. Not glamorous, but full enough of feeling to shape a voice that could silence the world of rock. Early career. After leaving Middlesbrough and moving to London in the late 1960s, Paul Rodgers quickly learned one hard truth. This city wasn't made for dreamers. Music here wasn't just about art. It was competition. It was survival. Hundreds of bands played every night. Thousands of voices rose only to disappear without a trace. But Rodgers, with his naturally soulful, thick and warm voice, didn't take long to get noticed. He first joined a small group called Brown Sugar, but the band failed to make an impact. It was during a show at Finsbury Park that Rodgers happened to meet a young guitarist named Paul Kossoff, who was instantly amazed by the way Rodgers sang an American blues song as if it were his native language. The two connected right away, and just weeks later they teamed up with drummer Simon Kirke and 15-year-old bassist Andy Fraser to form a new band, Free. In 1968, when the band officially started, their average age was just 18. The name Free was suggested by Rodgers himself, a statement of creative freedom, not tied down by the pop formulas ruling the time. The band signed with Island Records and released their first album, Tons of Sobs, a year later. Though the album wasn't a commercial success, it got critical attention, especially for Rodgers' vocal delivery, which combined raw wildness with emotional depth in a way that stood apart. But the real turning point came with their third album, Fire and Water 1970, and most notably the song All Right Now, co-written by Rodgers and Fraser in just 10 minutes after a disappointing show in Durham. No one expected the track to become one of the defining rock songs of the 1970s. shooting free from an unknown band to a global sensation in the span of a single summer. The song climbed into the top 5 in both the UK and US, and would later be played over 1 million times on American radio. A rare achievement for such a young band. From 1970 to 1972, Free toured across Europe and North America. But just as the stage lights were brightest, internal tensions began to show up. Kossoff struggled with addiction. Andy Fraser clashed creatively with Rodgers, and the band first broke up in 1971 when they were all just in their early 20s. Though Free got back together briefly afterward, the chemistry was never quite the same. Following the Heartbreaker album, in 1973, Paul Rodgers decided to leave, taking with him a fully grown voice and the experience needed to begin a new chapter, forming his own band. Before the world knew Bad Company, Paul Rodgers had already laid the foundation of his career with his voice alone, untrained, unpolished, but powerful enough to demand the industry's attention. With Free, he was not just a singer. He was a songwriter, a spiritual leader, and the one who lit the flame of blues rock in an era ruled by psychedelia and glam. It was a short beginning, but more than enough to prove Rodgers wasn't just a rising star. He was a force. Successful career. In 1973, after leaving Free, Paul Rodgers didn't rush back into the spotlight. Instead, he spent a few months thinking and writing music for the first time with the mindset of a grown man, no longer the 20-year-old kid from a factory town. During this period, he got a call from Mick Ralphs, former guitarist of Mott the Hoople. And together, they formed a new band with a name that sounded simple yet carried weight: Bad Company. Bad Company was the first band signed to Swan Song Records, the label founded by Led Zeppelin. Jimmy Page and Peter Grant personally backed the group with production, distribution, and promotion, with a lineup of Rodgers vocals, Ralph's guitar, Simon Kirke drums, and Boz Burrell bass. The band quickly became a new symbol of 1970s hard rock. Their first album, Bad Company 1974, wasn't just a commercial success, going platinum and hitting #1 on the Billboard chart. It also defined a distinct style: raw, emotional rock, unflashy in technique, yet packed with powerful soul. The song Can't Get Enough became an international hit. Feel Like Making Love, Shooting Star, Ready for Love. Each track was a testament to Rodgers' ability to tell stories through song. He didn't write music to show off his voice. He sang as if he were talking, confessing, sharing things only the experienced would understand. In a world of singers shouting to impress, Rodgers stepped back, and that made him stand out even more. From 1974 to 1982, Bad Company released 6 straight successful albums and performed hundreds of shows worldwide. Though the heavy touring sometimes wore him down, Rodgers remained the group's leader and soul. But by the early 80s, as music shifted toward new wave and synth pop, he made an unexpected choice to step away and focus on family. No scandals, no dramatic exit, just a man who knew when to walk away. After a few years of rest, Rodgers came back in 1984 with a unique project, The Firm, a collaboration with guitar legend Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin. Though the band only lasted until 1986, The Firm left its mark with 2 albums and hits like Radioactive and Satisfaction Guaranteed. While it wasn't as explosive as Bad Company, this phase allowed Rodgers to experiment and expand his musical depth. After closing the chapter with The Firm, Paul Rodgers began a new journey, a solo career where he had full artistic control. No compromises, no agreement needed, and the first thing he did was to distance himself from the noisy showbiz world. In 1983, he released his first solo album, Cut Loose, a deeply personal work in every sense. He wrote, sang, played most instruments, and produced the album himself. It wasn't made to sell. It was made to free him. Live in Peace, one of the standout tracks, would later be re-recorded with The Firm, but in its original form, it kept a more honest, stripped-down tone. Though it didn't spark commercial frenzy, Cut Loose was a quiet statement. Rodgers wasn't just a voice, he was a true artist. In the years that followed, he participated in various live projects, but it wasn't until 1993 that he released one of the most memorable solo albums of his career, Muddy Water Blues, a tribute to blues legend Muddy Waters, whom Rodgers considered the root of his musical soul. Far from a typical cover album, he invited an all-star lineup of rock and blues guitarists: Brian May of Queen, Gary Moore, Jeff Beck, David Gilmour of Pink Floyd, and more. The fusion of Rodgers' soul-rich voice with masterful guitar work created a nuanced blend of rock and blues, both modern and nostalgic. The album was Grammy-nominated and remains one of his most ambitious and respected efforts. Rodgers continued on his solo path, releasing live albums and reinterpreting his classic hits in fresh styles. In the 2000s, he toured extensively across Europe and North America, performing not just songs from Free and Bad Company, but also the old blues standards he grew up with. His solo shows were never flashy, just a middle-aged man in a leather jacket, a simple microphone, and a tight backing band. No special effects, just a voice that remained remarkably intact, expressive, and resonant. From 2009 to 2017, although he didn't release a studio album, Rodgers continued performing at major events, blues festivals, classic rock shows, charity concerts. In 2014, he released the Royal Sessions, a special project recorded at the historic Royal Studios in Memphis, Tennessee, where legends like Al Green once stood. The album featured classic soul and blues tracks like I've Been Loving You Too Long and That's How Strong My Love Is, delivered with a voice weathered by time yet still powerful. Critics called it an album sung from memory. Then, after a long break from the studio, Paul Rodgers returned in 2023 with an entirely new album, Midnight Rose, a milestone, marking the first time in nearly 25 years he released original material. The album was born in the wake of 2 serious strokes that nearly robbed him of his ability to speak. But instead of complaining, Rodgers sang in a deeper, more soulful tone steeped in blues, as if to say, "I'm still here, and music never left me." For Paul Rodgers, he doesn't chase charts or try to please the market. He simply sings because that's what he's done since he was a boy, listening to Ray Charles in a small home in Middlesbrough. And perhaps it's what he'll keep doing until he can no longer sing. No need for spotlights, just music, and a voice that has never betrayed itself. Personal life. While many rockers of his generation were known for partying, romantic scandals, and loud relationships, Paul Rodgers chose to live to a completely different rhythm. He was almost entirely absent from gossip magazines, never listed among rock's bad boys, and was never labeled a rebellious icon. Yet it is precisely this quietness that made him stand out. His private life became a place of balance, a source of depth and stability, not destruction. Rodgers' first marriage was to Michiko Shimizu, a Japanese woman he met in the 1970s. The marriage lasted over 2 decades, and they had 2 children together, Steve Rodgers, who would later pursue a music career, and a daughter who has largely stayed out of the public eye. Though Paul rarely speaks about his private life, those who have worked with him describe him as a devoted father, quiet, but always present when needed. When Bad Company was at its peak, he stepped away from the spotlight, not for professional reasons, but simply to be with his family. In an industry that often sacrifices privacy for fame, Rodgers did the opposite. He put his personal life ahead of the stage lights. After parting ways with Michiko, Rodgers remained single for many years until he met Cynthia Caroluk, former Miss Canada and a well-known television fitness expert. They married in 2007 in a small, intimate ceremony at their seaside home in British Columbia, Canada, where they continue to live today. Rodgers once said, "At this age, you don't need a grand wedding. You just need someone to walk with you through the quiet stretches of life." In Canada, he lives close to nature, far from big cities, practicing yoga, hiking, and gardening, habits that have helped him maintain both physical and mental strength after decades on the road. But that seemingly peaceful life was severely tested in 2016 when he suffered a major stroke that directly impacted his ability to speak. Then again in 2019, he experienced a second stroke along with 11 mini-strokes before and after. "I couldn't speak, I couldn't sing, and I didn't know if I'd ever be able to again," Rodgers shared in a rare interview after his recovery. A 6 and 1 2-hour surgery to relieve arterial pressure was miraculously successful. But it was his calm mindset, the unwavering support of Cynthia, and a disciplined lifestyle that enabled him to fully recover, eventually returning to the studio and releasing Midnight Rose just a few years later. "We don't talk about what was lost. We talk about what's still here," his wife told Canadian media. Paul Rodgers has never used his private life to seek attention, but the quiet battles he has endured, from the end of a marriage, fatherhood, in silence to fighting an illness that nearly took away his voice, all show one thing. This is a man whose strength lies in not needing to prove it. He doesn't need praise. He doesn't need to be a symbol because his real life, quiet, faithful, profound, is already a beautiful wordless song, legacy, and influence. Paul Rodgers was never the kind of name that exploded across newspaper headlines. He didn't possess the iconic image of Mick Jagger, didn't front a singular legendary band like Freddie Mercury, and never had scandals that fueled gossip behind the scenes. But when it comes to voice, the real voice, legends always mention him. In Rolling Stone magazine's list of the 100 greatest singers of all time, Paul Rodgers was ranked 55th above many high-profile names, surprising those outside the music world. But to singers, musicians, and producers, that ranking came as no surprise. Freddie Mercury once called Rodgers the best rock singer in England. Brian May was even more direct. I've played with many vocalists, but only Paul Rodgers makes me stop and listen. Unlike many of his peers who relied on volume, pitch, or growling techniques, Rodgers was a master of restraint and inner power. He could sing the blues like a Southern-born, Black American, shift into hard rock with grounded intensity, or deliver a ballad with tenderness and depth. His voice never broke with time. It aged like fine wine, not like something ruined by drinking. His influence stretches across generations. David Coverdale of Deep Purple and Whitesnake, Bruce Dickinson of Iron Maiden, Joe Bonamassa, Chris Cornell, Kelly Hansen of Foreigner, all have cited Paul Rodgers as a model of natural, unforced, and deeply expressive singing. In an era where many sing to impress, Rodgers sang to feel, and that is what endures. Musically, he helped shape the very definition of modern blues rock, taking it beyond its American roots and blending it with the gritty, emotive essence of 1970s British rock. With Free, he brought a raw, soulful intensity. With Bad Company, he set a new standard for arena-ready hard rock. With The Firm, he reimagined what Led Zeppelin veterans could become. And with Queen, he proved that a great artist doesn't need to replace anyone. Being fully himself was more than enough. Outside of music, Rodgers has quietly contributed to charitable and community efforts. He has donated proceeds from shows to animal welfare organizations, public health causes in both Canada and the UK, and especially to medical support services following his own recovery from strokes. There were no grand publicity campaigns, just small, consistent acts of giving, much like his singing, understated, but unmistakably felt. And perhaps it is this perseverance, honesty, and unwavering refusal to trade quality for fame that is Paul Rodgers' greatest legacy. In an industry that changes faster every year, he remains a symbol of steadfastness, where music doesn't need to chase trends, but only needs to stand strong. Faces that once dominated television may fade from memory, but a voice, if it truly reaches something deep within, never disappears. And Paul Rodgers, in his own quiet way, has left exactly that behind. Current life. Paul Rodgers doesn't live in the noise of former glory. In his 70s, he has chosen a different rhythm, slower, quieter, yet far from idle. After decades of touring stages big and small, he now lives with his wife Cynthia Caroluk in a seaside home in British Columbia, Canada. There, surrounded by pine forests and the sound of waves, he still writes music every day, practices yoga, goes hiking, and occasionally reappears like a quiet grace note in an increasingly chaotic rock world. In 2023, Rodgers released Midnight Rose, marking his first album of entirely new original songs in nearly 25 years. It was a milestone, especially considering that just a few years earlier, he had suffered 2 major strokes and 11 minor ones that nearly robbed him of his ability to speak and sing. A 6 and 1 to 2 hour brain surgery didn't just save his health, it allowed that voice to rise again with even more depth and strength than before. In 2024, he continued promoting Midnight Rose in his own way. No massive tours, no media blitz, just select meaningful appearances. In September 2024, he released a music video for Photo Shooter, one of the album's standout tracks, featuring simple, elegant visuals and a voice still rich with emotion. While fans had hoped for a world tour, Rodgers instead stayed connected through interviews and behind-the-scenes videos where he shared his recovery journey and how music remains an essential part of being alive. By 2025, Rodgers continues to work in quiet but meaningful ways. He is involved in a special project titled Can't Get Enough, a tribute to Bad Company, an album celebrating the hits of the band he co-founded, featuring artists from the worlds of rock, country, and Americana. The project is planned for release in fall 2025, serving as a reflection not of nostalgia, but of recognition from the next generations to the man who helped pave the way. On social media, he still interacts with fans through short posts, behind-the-scenes photos, and everyday reflections. But Rodgers is no longer concerned with media strategy. He doesn't follow trends, no live streams, no podcasts. He chooses to be present just enough but always authentic. There are no large tours planned in the past 2 years, and Rodgers himself confirmed this to dispel rumors. "I don't need to travel far to sing anymore. I just need a quiet place and someone truly listening," he wrote on his official Twitter for Paul Rodgers. His current life is not a conclusion. It is a peaceful chapter still being written. He has nothing left to prove. What needed to be sung, he has sung. What needed to be preserved he still holds on to. An original voice, a grounded way of living, and an unconditional love for music. Just like when he first left Middlesbrough in search of something real in a world growing more artificial every day, Paul Rodgers may not be the loudest voice in the room, but he's the one who makes the whole room fall silent when he sings. He never chased the spotlight, yet the light around him has never dimmed. From Free to Bad Company, from Jimmy Page to Queen, from the operating room back to the recording studio, Paul has always remained steady, quiet, and never losing himself. What impresses you most about Paul Rodgers? His powerful voice, his calm presence, or his unwavering consistency over more than half a century? Let us know in the comments below if you found this video meaningful. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss more inspiring musical journeys. Because after Paul Rodgers, there are still so many artists waiting for you to discover. Not just those who write music, but those who live their entire lives to the rhythm of their own truth.